Hey viewers, my name's Cara. I'm your host for Tuesdays here on the Pagan Perspective, or Wednesdays, depending on the time zone that you are in. And this week, we're talking about curses. This week's topic comes from Christmas Mouse. This is one of the topics that was asked sometime in the past year. And the text will be in the description of this video as always, but it reads, Witches, Wiccans, Pagans, and their ethics, to bless and blast? If being a witch is about spells, then why is it against the Rede to curse/hex? Didn't Crowley blast? I know one priestess who's blasted so many times that let's just say it got real. Very real. Not all witches and pagans believe in the Rede, ... So, there's actually a few different things to talk about here. Overall, of course, we're talking about cursing and ethics. We've talked about the Rede previously on this channel in multiple forms, but not for a few years at least. And probably the main times that we've talked about it were years ago. So I've talked about it before, but maybe not everyone else on the channel has done a topic here about the Rede. So it's nice to revisit every so often, but there are definitely older videos about it as well. We've done various videos about pagan ethics, our personal ethics, answering specific ethics related questions. So definitely do a little search on the channel, see what else you can find if you're interested in this type of thing. Crowley is mentioned in this one, so for anyone watching who might not know yet, that's Alistair Crowley, and we've actually done videos about Crowley too, but we don't do videos like that anymore because it's very difficult to feel like we're basically like giving our perspective on another human being, people that we don't actually know. Maybe we know them through their work, and I think we can talk about their work, maybe their books, but it's a little more difficult to feel like we're just talking about a person. And I know, like, for me personally, when we've talked about different people on the collab in the past, I don't really know them, I don't really know anything about them, it feels weird. And then later, maybe you find out they watch your videos, or you meet them somewhere because maybe they come to a pagan event that you're attending, and then you get to meet them, and then all you're thinking in the back of your mind is like, oh, I said this about you years ago when I didn't know you, and I was just going by what I read online and stuff. So anyway, but we had talked about Crowley in the past, but I have no idea what I said about Crowley in the past. I still don't know that much more about him now, but I do have a little bit of a different understanding of Crowley now because I've been working at the Buckland Museum. We own some things that belonged to him. We talk about his influence on the Western occult tradition and things like that. But anyway, for any of you who didn't know who was being referred to in the topic, that's Alistair Crowley. He founded the religious tradition, magical tradition known as Thelema, and was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, had met or at least spoke with Gerald Gardner in the past, and there's a lot of influence over things have come from Crowley, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not. But anyway, this topic is about cursing. So first thing, if being a witch is about spells, why is it against the Rede to curse or hex? Really breaking this down one little thing at a time, my first reaction when I first read this topic was actually, that depends on who you ask, because to a lot of people, being a witch is not just about spells. Spellcraft is merely one aspect of witchcraft as a whole. And something that I've definitely come to realize over the past few years is that a lot of people use the terms witchcraft and magic interchangeably or synonymously, as though they are the same thing, as though all magic is witchcraft and all there is to witchcraft is doing magic. And I also used to say this because I think this is something that people pass around a lot. It's definitely something that we read online a lot. And I know for a fact that I used to think this because I used to say, my mother is a Christian and a spiritualist and all these things, but she would occasionally do spells and rituals with me, even though I identified as a witch and she never did, because she would do magic sometimes. In my mind, I thought and I've said before in like older videos, because I've been making videos for like 10 years, I used to say, my mom doesn't identify as a witch, but in my mind, I think of her as a witch. I think of her as part of this community because she does magic. But she doesn't identify as a witch. And so, especially in the past few years, as I've realized, those words aren't actually interchangeable. And not only do I still see a lot of people using them interchangeably, I used to do it too. So I absolutely understand where that comes from, because I think it is passed around a lot. And so a lot of people might read that first and go with it, which is what I had done too. So now I do not believe that those words are interchangeable. I don't think that magic is all there is to witchcraft, and all you need to do in order to be a witch is do magic or do spells. Spellcraft is just one part of witchcraft, because there are magico-religious traditions the world over where practitioners of them do magic, and all of those people are not necessarily witches, because witchcraft is a term that refers to a very specific path depending on who you ask. Absolutely, there are people, if you ask today, that will tell you it's just about magic. But to me, being a witch is not just about spells. So, first thing covered in this topic, why is it against the Rede to curse or hex? Well, as this person mentions at the end of their question, firstly, they say not all witches and pagans believe in the Rede. And that's true. And I think that's part of, really, you answered your own question in a way. Not everybody follows this, basically. The Rede is followed by some people. Actually, I think many people throughout my experience, at least. Not that I know everyone in the world, so I can't really judge whether that's many. It's probably still a very small minority of people. But many of the people that I know, have known over the past 10 years, or have talked to, many of them, even if they do not consider themselves Wiccan, do consider themselves to follow some sort of code of ethics like the Rede. It might not be the Rede, it might be worded differently, but a lot of people do have this sort of code of ethics of not wanting to knowingly and consciously cause harm when it is not necessary, not doing it on purpose, not doing it when it has not been instigated. A lot of people believe in not being the instigator of harm. But many of us talk about self-defense and protection and things like that. Those are also topics we've talked about here on the channel. A couple years ago, I remember we talked about protection magic and self-defense, and whether or not that's something that we believe we should be doing. Because there are some people who evidently believe that even something in self-defense is still considered negative and that they shouldn't do it. That's not something that I had ever learned, even as a beginner, even as a baby witch, 15, 17 something years ago. I was talking to one of my viewers who follows me on social media. We were talking about how we were both around the same age and we started practicing around the same time, and they said, we've been practicing for like 17 years at this point. And I was like, yeah, wow, that's a long time. But so definitely right from the beginning, I remember reading in books and online and learning from other people that I was chatting with that self-defense is something that Wiccans do. There are things that we do that even though we have the Rede, which is essentially a poem that is used as liturgy. Actually, I forgot, I wanted to have it in front of me. So one moment. So yeah, I have the Rede in front of me. It's essentially a poem, and it actually talks about a lot of stuff, but it doesn't really talk about cursing. There are a lot of little like one-liner quotes that you may have heard. So like the first line is, "Bide the Wiccan law ye must, in perfect love and perfect trust." It talks about going in a Jessel motion when the moon is waxing and Widdershins when the moon is waning. So sunwise and anti-sunwise or earthwise. In the northern hemisphere, that's Jessel is clockwise and Widdershins is counterclockwise, but in the southern hemisphere they would be reversed because the apparent motion of the sun and the earth are different on the other part of the equator, on the other side of the equator. So it talks about that. It talks about the 4 winds. It talks about 9 sacred woods. that you burn in the fire. So one of the times that it actually mentions the word curse is the line, "Elder is the lady's tree, burn it not, or cursed you'll be." And that refers to, like, don't burn elder wood because it's sacred to the goddess, and if you do that, you will be cursed. It doesn't say how, it's just a line in the poem, right? And then it talks about the Sabbats, rhyming couplets about the Sabbats. And then we have things like, "Where the rippling waters go, cast a stone, the truth you'll know." So like little things that are like suggestions for spells or types of magic, maybe. "With a fool no season spend, or be counted as his friend. Merry meet and merry part, break the cheeks and warm the heart." Just little sayings and things. It does talk about the Threefold Law, which is another thing that a lot of people question, a lot of Wiccans even question, because it was kind of an invented concept later on. Not all Wiccans follow the Threefold Law, and that's part of the poem that is known as the Wiccan Rede. "Mind the threefold laws you should, 3 times bad and 3 times good." That's the kind of warning, or just the idea that if you're putting out bad into the universe, you'll get it back 3 times. 3 times as bad, or bad 3 separate times, depending on how you interpret it. Typically, it's 3 times as bad. If you're putting out good into the universe, you'll get back good times 3. That's in the Rede, but it's not something that everyone agrees with either. And then what we're really talking about is the final line, which is, "These 8 words the Rede fulfill, and ye harm none, do what ye will." An, A-N, means if. It's kind of like Old English or Middle English. So what it really says is, if ye, you, if you harm none, do what you will. And some versions it says, "do what thou wilt," but the version that I have printed here says, "do what ye will." Either way, it's, if you harm none, do what you will. Do what you want to, basically. So we've talked about the Rede before, and what I had learned from a lot of Wiccans that I have, spoken to, been friends with over the years, whatever. And we're talking Wiccans online and things written in books, as well as 3rd degree high priestesses of their various traditions within what is known as Wicca. What I have heard from a lot of people, and therefore what I have always said when I talk about this, is that the Rede tells us, if what you're doing will not cause harm, go ahead and do it. The Rede does not go on to say, if what you are planning to do will cause harm, here's what you need to do, or here's what will befall you. It doesn't say anything about that. The only thing the entire poem says about being cursed is if you burn elderwood. And, that's just kind of, I feel like it's just part of the rhyming phrase. It's talking about all the 9 sacred woods. Cursed you'll be. Maybe that just fit the rhyme scheme a little better than bad luck will befall you, or maybe you just shouldn't because it's disrespectful, or, whatever. But yeah, the Rede just says, if you're not hurting anyone, go ahead and do what you want. And knowing kind of the time period that this came out of, it was definitely different then than it is now. But I feel like a lot of it is relevant today, as far as like being who you are despite other people having a problem with some of the ways that you live your life, such as being a witch or being gay or anywhere else in the LGBTQIA2S plus community. So like for myself, I'm bisexual or pansexual. So it could refer to, love who you love. If you're not hurting anyone, do what you want, kiddo. Like that's the kind of sort of like loving advice that the Rede is. And Rede, the word, means like guidance or advice. It doesn't mean law. And so it's just a suggestion, but it's notable that it doesn't go on to say, if you harm people, here's what will happen. So the way that a lot of us interpret that is, if what we are intending to do will cause harm, and what constitutes harm really differs by the situation, really depends on who you ask as well. Because some people could just consider witchcraft across the board harmful, or being a homosexual could be considered by some people to be harmful because of their own religious beliefs or whatever. Whereas we know that's not harm, you know? So what constitutes harm is a separate question. But if we know by our own interpretation, we consciously know that whatever we are planning to do is going to cause someone harm, pretty much that just means it's up to us to deal with whatever might come of that, whatever consequences there might be, whatever might happen in our lives as a result of the action that we've taken. And it's not just magical either, it's in general. If you do something in your quote unquote mundane life that you know is going to harm someone, you need to be cognizant of the fact that there will be consequences, whatever those might be, and we have to be willing to accept those consequences when we decide to do that. I mentioned before, a lot of us consider self-defense to be acceptable. So in that case, our reasoning, why would we want to do this? Why would we want to cause someone harm? Might be because they are causing me harm, or they are doing harm to many people in the world. And so I want to do something to counteract that. I want to seek justice. I want to have them feel the pain and the hurt that they are causing others in order to encourage them to stop. Or I want to banish them, or, you know, some people will do binding, things like that. And all of those things are considered part of the potential of what we might do. You know, none of those things are considered ultimately bad, like never do them, like you can never do things in self-defense. But I have learned over the past few years on the internet that some people believe that. Some people believe that magic in self-defense is always negative and always bad and we should never do it. And some people consider banishing the same as a curse, which I really don't think is the case. And I would have to be able to talk to those people more to find out how they're breaking that down and why they think that, which I've never been able to do. It's just little things that I've seen in posts that, you know, kind of get shared around. And I've seen people say, and I'll talk about this more in a video on my personal channel, because I've actually been planning a video on my personal channel about curses for over a year now, and I just haven't gotten around to doing it. So I won't talk about this too long because this video is already long. But I've seen people who consider themselves pro-cursing talk about how just because I consider myself pro-cursing doesn't mean that I go out and do it without someone deserving it. You know, it doesn't mean that there's not a reason for it before I do it. It doesn't mean that I'm not acting in self-defense. It doesn't, you know, whatever. And so when I first saw that, and it was like a random meme post, you know, thing that people were just posting around. When I first saw that, I thought, oh, it doesn't? Because to me, pro-cursing is something very different than thinking about, you know, like seeking justice against someone who has already done the harm in the first place. I've always thought of cursing as like just, you know, you get mad, you get upset, you want to curse someone, you know. And apparently that's not what it is to people who consider themselves pro-curse. So that's something that I've been sort of changing my schema around, changing the way that I think about it and this idea of it that I have in my head, because now it's being challenged by people saying, I'm pro-cursing and this is what I mean by it. And it's very different than what I thought people meant. So that was a long little side trek talking about the Rede and what it really says and how we interpret it and such. The next question in the topic was, didn't Crowley blast? And yeah, I think he probably did. This isn't a video about Crowley, but I do want to just quickly note that, again, as I said earlier, Crowley founded a tradition called Thelema. Crowley was not Wiccan. He knew Gerald Gardner, but was not Wiccan himself. So I don't think we would be necessarily expecting Crowley to follow the advice of the piece of writing known as the Wiccan Rede. And a lot of people have, you know, different feelings about Crowley. Some people might want to do nothing that Crowley ever did. So if Crowley was doing something, that's definitely not an argument that would make other people think, oh, then I could do it too. Because I think plenty of people would think, oh, if Crowley did it, then it's really bad and I'll never do that. So asking whether Crowley did something and whether that means the rest of us can do it isn't going to be the most helpful argument depending on who you're talking to. Just, again, a note. But yeah, I think he probably did. And again, depending on what you mean by that, you know, lots of our Wiccan elders, we could say, lots of people in the neo-pagan movement who came before us, whether or not they were part of what is now known as Wicca or not, lots of them definitely took part in magic for self-defense, magic for protection, social justice magic, magical activism. There were a lot of things going on that maybe some people today, depending on how narrow that definition of cursing or blasting isn't really a term that I use, so I don't know if I'm using it incorrectly. I don't know if it is synonymous or interchangeable with cursing. I don't know. I don't even know. But I know that it's part of like the phrase to bless and to blast. But other than that, I really don't know. But there were definitely a lot of things that practitioners of magic have been doing for decades, and ever since this movement kind of got restarted. And some people today might consider them cursing or negative magic. Again, like that depends on how you think of these terms and how we categorize things, because there's definitely things that people have done and continue to do that I don't consider them cursing. If you're doing magic for social justice is a big thing right now. It's something that I do. The reclaiming tradition was built on magical activism and social justice and social change magic. And so if there are people who sort of think that, blanket statement across the board, all of that is negative, then, that's a very different definition than how we would say it. But I don't consider anything that I personally have ever done to be a curse, but that's based on my personal definition as well. I have done things like banishing. I have definitely done self-defense magic, protection, things like that. So if some people out there think of that as negative and think of that as just as bad as a curse or whatever, then they would have a very different opinion and a very different way of describing what I've done. But only I really know what I've done. Only you really ever know what you've done. So in that same way, we can't really determine how to categorize what other people have done unless it's really laid out, every little detail about it, every bit of reasoning why they did it, and what they actually did. And then, that's kind of the last question that was in the comment, because the rest is just talking about knowing a priestess who's done it, and it got really real. So again, it's just like accepting the consequences. If that person was okay with whatever would happen as a result, whether that's, the result that I want is going to happen, and I'm definitely okay with that because I want that result. Or like, if this comes back at me a little bit, like I lose a friend over it, or I don't know, whatever it might be, if there's something that would be considered a negative consequence, then that person accepted that and obviously did this sort of thing over and over, so they must have been okay with what they were doing. And then, not all witches and pagans believe in the Rede. That's very true. It is often known as the Wiccan Rede. Some people just call it the Rede, but the title, I guess, is the Wiccan Rede. It did come out of the tradition that is now known as Wicca. So people who are not considering themselves part of any of those traditions may not consider themselves to have anything to do with the Rede. And as I said, people who do consider themselves part of Wicca, even, we have different opinions about the stuff that's actually in the Rede, and different lines and different things that are kind of mentioned within it, such as the Threefold Law, or really any number of things in it, because there is no sacred holy text for any of these paths, for any neo-pagan, pagan, Wiccan, witch path. There are writings that people, human beings, have written. Some of them might be channeled. Thelema, Alistair Crowley has the Book of the Law and other things. We have the Wiccan Rede. We have maybe Gerald Gardner's books, Doreen Valiente's books, Raymond Buckland's books, and any number of people's books that are about Wicca. So there are words of people in reclaiming tradition. We have Starhawk's books. We have Thorn Coyle. So we have authors, but none of those are really the kind of like sacred holy text that maybe other religions have. And so anything that we have is kind of like, we look to it for advice, guidance, suggestion, inspiration, a feeling like we are part of something bigger, part of community, but they're not typically things that are immune to being criticized, especially as things progress over time. The community progresses, we grow, we change, society grows and changes, and the more years that pass, our older books have things in them that we don't agree with anymore, and that's okay, because they were never sacred holy scripture in the way for us that maybe other religions' texts are for them. So whether you agree with every single word in the Wiccan Rede or not is up to you. And it doesn't necessarily mean that someone who does happen to agree with the things must be a Wiccan. Maybe they're actually part of another path, but they agree with the general concept, or maybe they also honor the Sabbats, or the four winds are in the Rede. No one really ever talks about that, like there's all kinds of things in the Rede that we don't talk about a lot. One of my other favorite little things from the Rede is light of eye and soft of touch, speak you little, listen much. Very specifically, speak you little, listen much is a little piece of advice or guidance that I've taken in my life and used multiple times. So there are little bits of inspiration, But yeah, I think that most people, in order to identify as Wiccan, we tend to say, well, you have to agree with the Rede. And what we mean by that really is just that last statement. It's not that you have to agree with everything in the entire poem usually. Usually what people mean is just that last bit. And it harm none, do what thou wilt. If it harms no one, go ahead and do it. That's the end of that sentence. It doesn't tell us how to proceed if what we do will knowingly cause harm as we interpret it. That's left up to us. There is definitely autonomy in Wicca and in all of these paths. Personal responsibility is highly emphasized. And so, yeah, it's just a matter of, I think it's more loving encouragement. If you're not hurting anyone, have a good time, And if it is going to hurt someone, that's a separate conversation, and we need to know what we're doing and know why we're doing it and accept responsibility for everything that we choose to do, magically or mundane, in our lives. And that's really what it comes down to for me. Thank you so much for watching and or listening to this, what is likely to be a very long video. It's actually in a couple parts, so I can't see exactly how long it is, probably about half an hour. So thanks so much, and thanks to Christmas Mouse for sending in this topic. Again, there, lots of little things in here that we've kind of talked about before, but maybe not for a while, and this is a little bit of a different angle on it anyway. So thank you for that. Thank you to all of you for watching and or listening, as I said. Thank you to the rest of the Pagan Perspective team. And if you'd like to share your ideas in the comments so that other viewers can have a conversation with you about it, go ahead and do that. And I will see you next time. I believe next week is Subs Week, so I'll see you next month. Until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.